How to build a feral cat shelter. There are far too many feral cats in our communities, and by building cat shelters, we can help to protect them from the elements and from predators. Let's get started. Draw this cutting pattern on your sheet of plywood with a tape measure and a pencil. You can use a rafter square if you have one. Use a circular saw to cut out the sides, floor, and roof. Leave the front and back walls uncut. This extra piece will be used at a later stage of construction. Cut 4 2x4s at 18.5 inches to use as legs. Now we will start on the base. In this pattern, pre-screw 1 5/8 screws into the plywood just until you see the point of the screw protrude a tiny bit out the other side of the plywood. Drive the screws through the plywood into the legs. You need to align the leg nicely with the corner of the plywood and hold it steady while you start with the middle screw. After the first screw is in, straighten the leg out if necessary and continue with the rest of the screws. Now measure the 2x4 openings in between each of the legs for support. There isn't an exact measurement for each piece because of the variability of the lumber and construction techniques. Hold a 2x4 in position touching the inside of one leg and take a pencil and mark its length at the end of the other leg. Cut each 2x4 piece with the chop saw. When cutting these pieces, remember to err on the larger side when you cut because you can always go back and trim a little shorter if necessary. You want these to fit perfectly. Now drill the 4-inch screws on an ankle through each of the long side supports into the legs. In this pattern, using 2.5-inch screws, secure all 4 legs to the shorter front and back supports. In this pattern, screw the plywood down into the framing with 1 5/8 screws. This should give you a nice solid base. Now you will attach the side pieces. Although not necessary, if you have clamps, it may be helpful to use them at this point. Secure the sides with 1 5/8 screws in a zigzag pattern. Frame the back wall with 2x2 wood or whatever wood you have on hand. It is not critical what size. We cut a 2x4 in half the long way for this purpose. Measure between the side pieces at the bottom to get an accurate length for the upper cross brace. Align the cross brace at the top of the wall on both sides and flat with the back. Use 2.5-inch screws to screw the upper cross brace into place. Now measure between the cross brace and floor on both sides and cut 2x2s to fit. Use the pencil marking technique as shown. Attach the side pieces with 3 1 5/8 screws. Repeat with the second side brace. Repeat this process to frame the front entrance with the addition of a lower brace. Use 4 1 5/8 screws. Reinforce the front and back upper braces with 3-inch screws on an angle. Use the extra plywood for the front and back walls of the house. Hold the plywood up against the back of the cat house and mark the exact lines to be cut. Cut on the lines. Attach with 1 5/8 screws in the pattern shown. If you have clamps, they may be used at this time. For the front wall, again hold the plywood up to the front of the house and mark the lines to be cut. Cut with a circular saw. Place the front wall in position and reach inside to mark the inside framing lines. This will show the limits of where the door and window can be placed. Draw to your liking a door and window to be cut out. Keep in mind the limits that you drew. I stayed a 1/2 inch away from the limits. Drill a starter hole for each opening and cut out the door and window with a jigsaw. Do not attach the front entrance yet. Measure inside the framing on the sides and the back wall for the styrofoam insulation. Transfer the measurements onto the styrofoam and cut out with a utility or X-Acto knife. Use caulking as glue and press the styrofoam in place. Add more caulking in the corners of the styrofoam for extra security and wipe smooth with your finger. You will want to allow the caulk to dry before moving on to the next steps. Now onto the roof. Cut 2 2x4s at 22.5 inches. Cut 2 2x4s at 45 inches. Assemble the frame with 2.5-inch screws as shown. Place the plywood roof piece onto the frame flush with the sides. Attach with 1 5/8 screws in the pattern shown. Now onto the roof shingles. Cut shingles 23 inches. This will allow for a 1/4 inch overlap on either side. Starting at the back of the roof, which is lower than the front, place the first course of shingles with a 1/4 inch overlapping the roof on each side. Attach with roofing nails as shown. Each new course of shingles will overlap the previous course. Place the next course about 4 inches higher up the roof. Repeat this with the next courses, and for the final course, overlap a 1/4 of an inch off the roof. Now it's time to paint the shelter. Temporarily place the front wall in position for the painting. I chose a camouflage pattern in order to blend in with the environment. I started with a base coat of dark green and then added accent colors of light green and tan. Also lightly paint the inside of the house. Now it's time for the window and door curtain. Cut the plexiglass window with the circular saw about a half an inch bigger than the hole in the wood on each side. Now pre-drill the holes in the window in the pattern shown. Use the washers and 5/8 screws to secure the window to the inside of the front wall. The washers are so that the screws don't poke through the wood. Be gentle and don't over-tighten the screws. Use scissors to cut your material taller than the door and even with the sides. Cut about 7 strips and leave room at the top. Now use a staple gun to staple the vinyl to the wood above the door. Screws can be used if that's all you have. Screw the front wall to the house in the pattern shown. We need to install a mount for the hinges. Cut a 2x4 to fit inside of the roof. Place it about 12.5 inches from the front and about 29 inches from the back. Line up the 2x4 with the measurements and drive 3 2.5-inch screws from the sides into the mount. Mount the hinges with 1 5/8 screws with the pin towards the front. The hinges should be about 1.5 inches from each side. I added a little extra spray paint over the mount and hinges. Place the roof on the house with the second half of the hinges outside of the front wall. Use 1 5/8 screws to screw the hinges in place. The materials you need are 1 4x8-foot sheet of half-inch plywood, 5 8-foot 2x4s, 1 8-foot 2x2, 5/8-inch screws, 1 5/8-inch screws, 2.5-inch screws, 3-inch screws, 4-inch screws, 1 1/4-inch roofing nails, flat washers. The material for the door curtain can vary. I used clear vinyl that can be found in an automotive upholstery shop, a Lexan polycarbonate sheet, standard door hinges. Galvanized hinges are better for the weather. About 11 asphalt roofing shingles, a tape measure, a cordless drill, silicone caulk and a caulking gun, a framing square, optional clamps, a carpenter's pencil, scissors, a utility knife, a jigsaw, spray paint, dark green, light green, and tan, a staple gun and staples, an optional rafter square, and a chop saw.